Well, good morning. My name's Craig. If I haven't met you, I'm the pastor of this church, and we are going through the book of Acts. If you weren't here last week was about how God works through Christians to save the world, and this week is what those Christians who save the world look like. So last week we began our look into the unstoppable gospel, and we picked up the story in Acts 9, and we took note last week that God himself is, of course, the indispensable power who saves people. He is the divine cause of salvation. He leads people to Jesus. So he does the work. Yet the means by which he saves people is people. He sends in a particular type of people to save people, and those people who he sends in is the church. I want you to imagine it like this. Meet Joe. Joe spent his life savings on a boat, and it wasn't a very good idea because he's not very ocean worthy, and he didn't see that wave coming, and he lost control, and the boat is flipped, and now Joe is stranded on the ocean, and he's standing on his vessel, and there is no hope in sight. But what's that noise? And what's that on the horizon? It's a chopper. It's the RAC rescue chopper, and it's above Joe now, and someone's being lowered down on a rope, and before Joe knows it, he's wrapped in a blanket, a warm cup of tea in his hands, and he's having a couple of Tim Tams. Now, he's been given life. Who saved him? The guy who came down the rope saved him, and maybe the pilot and the guy on the winch on top. But ultimately, there's this team behind his salvation, the RAC, that larger body, the larger corporation. Now, in a similar way, God is the CEO of the rescue operation. He calls the shots. He's the one who saves. He's the one who sends out the choppers. But the ones who he sends out are you and I. That's what he does. And now we're looking at a story about Saul where we looked last week. We saw the rescue operation. So a chopper was sent to save Saul. That was in the start of chapter 9. But no sooner has Saul finished his Tim Tams, he's back on the chopper, this time not to be rescued, but to rescue others. And that's what Christians do. Saved people save people. This morning we're looking at what saved people who save people look like. So there's Saul. He's soon to be renamed the Apostle Paul. He's our Exhibit A. We're going to watch how he has changed, what he does after meeting Jesus. And he shows us just how saved individuals stand up for Christ and accounted for Christ. And the question we're going to ask is, are we willing to stand up for Christ too? Do we look like what Saul looks like? So now to say this, we have 5 Ds on the menu today. I don't normally stoop so low as alliteration. Today I've clearly hit rock bottom because we've got 5 Ds. 3 desires, a difference, and the difficulties of saved people who save people. So the first thing we see in this story is the first desire of the Christian is actually to begin to confess Christ openly. I mean, why wouldn't you confess the RAC if they saved you? In verse 18 of chapter 9, Saul stands up and can see now. Remember, if you don't know the story about Saul, he wanted to just destroy all the Jews, and then he's blinded by the light, and he's revved up like a deuce, and he's ready to live life for Jesus. And he has nothing to eat or drink for 3 days. And the first thing, once he's saved, the first thing on the agenda is not a sandwich. It's to be baptized. He wanted to immediately be counted for Christ. That's what the decision for baptism means for us, isn't it? Baptism tells the world that I want to be counted with Jesus. Because just as Christ died and rose again, Christians died and rose again, we've been washed of our sins, and when we decide to get baptized, that means we want to fly his flag. And we want to wear his colors. We want to be counted for Christ. We want to be called a Christian. The first desire of the Christian is to confess Christ openly. I read a story about a famous missionary. His name is Sadhu Sundar Singh, and he was a great missionary to India. And he was born to a Sikh family, Sikh parents. But he was converted at school. And when he told his dad, he was literally beaten from one house to the other for many, many days. But he was still accepted as the son in the house. And that is until the day he decided to be baptized, and then he was kicked out. He was rejected by his family. We're going to hear more about Sadhu lately. But for now, baptism for Saul, like Sadhu, was the sign of being counted with Christ. And maybe that's the first question that you could ask you. Have you been baptized? That is, have you been counted for Christ? Have you professed your faith in Christ? Maybe you haven't yet, because what is water anyway, or what is words? Like what is water? It's just a symbol, isn't it? Just like a wedding ring, it's just a symbol. It's not the ring that counts, right? It's my heart. But then isn't the symbol worth something in public? Imagine a wife goes out to Freo and leaves her wedding ring and engagement at home. Like, what does that say to the husband? It's not about wearing a ring. It's not about wearing it. But what's the message that we're leaving by leaving this commitment symbol at home? What's the message about leaving commitments behind the walls at home? I remember a mate in year 8. He was a top mate. That is, of course, unless anyone else was around. And then he wanted nothing to do with me. Now, is that what we're like with Jesus? Like, dear Lord, thank you for absolutely everything. I want to be more like you. Shh, somebody's coming. Quick, hide. Who are you talking to? Nobody. Like, what if our commitment to Jesus is like that? It's behind closed doors and not public because we're afraid or ashamed to be counted with Jesus. Like, what if we acknowledge that Jesus counted us worth saving, but we don't count him worth sharing? Does that sound like a relationship? Does that sound like someone who really gets Jesus? And none of that is actually to make us feel rotten or rubbish, because that's not the point. The point is, Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. It's like, he loves us. He desired to save us. He's rescued us. He came to get us and died for us, and every day he watches over us. And what could be more grand than having him, of being associated with him? It's just so topsy-turvy that we would be satisfied to be counted with Jesus, but not satisfied to share Jesus. I mean, why aren't we instead bewildered that Jesus would consider us worthy of being counted with him, or making us worthy to be counted with him? So being counted with Christ is one of the desires of the Christian. What's another one? It's there in our text, verse 19. Saul spent several days with the disciples in Damascus. And later on in verse 26, we see that when he goes to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples. So a second desire of a Christian, I think we can say, is you want to hang out with other Christians. I remember when I first got into spearfishing, I just wanted to find out everything about spearfishing. I wanted to talk to anyone who wanted to do spearfishing. In fact, when I arrived here, one of the first things I asked, everyone, those who I thought would be spearfishing, I wanted to find out who spearfished too, which is why I like the reason why I like Jeremy. One of the only reasons I like Jeremy. We chase down those who love what we love. That's why we subscribe to these YouTube guys, or follow those people on Instaphoto, because they love what we love. And well, actually, that's a good question. How many Christians are we following, by the way? Online, how many Christians are speaking into our day to day because they like Christ like we like Christ? I mean, it seems like Saul felt first and foremost he needs to find Christ. And is that our... he needed to find Christ, and he needed to find Christians who love his Christ. And the question is that our experience? It's a good thing to hang out with Christians. time with genuine Christians influence us. It builds us, doesn't it? There's this deep need that's met in us when we hang out with other Christians who love Jesus too. And so let's think about how often do we wonder whether it's worth staying at home because the coffee machine is hot and second coffee is coming and it's easy there, but we tell ourselves don't give in to the temptress, let's get out and let's go to church. If we do that 19 times out of 20, we're happy that we did it. It's encouraging to hang out with Christians. It's a beautiful thing to be part of this family. So Christians desire to be counted for Christ, and Christians desire to hang out with other Christians to be built by them and to build them as well. The third desire we see here is a really tough one. A Christian desires to undo past errors. A Christian desires to undo past errors. Do you see where Saul goes back to as a Christian? The first place he goes back to is the synagogues. That's the places where he used to be held in high esteem for being against Christianity. I wonder what he felt like when he was walking in. Was he scared? Or was he worried? Or was he so compelled by Jesus he couldn't wait to walk in? So verse 2 says, at once he began to preach in the synagogues. So do you know what a synagogue is? It's let's just call it a Jewish church. That's where they go to listen about God. Jews meet for Jewish stuff at a synagogue. And they're what do they thought when Saul comes in? Hey guys, it's Saul. Way to go, Saul. How's the Christian bashing going? And he goes, no, I'm a Christian now. Good one, Saul. No, seriously, how many Christians have you thrown in prison? And he's like, no, seriously, let me tell you what I've learned about Jesus. I was wrong. Everything that I did and thought and said was wrong. So notice that our some of us might need to hear this. Our past life is not a disqualification to teach about Jesus. Our past life is not a disqualification to preach. It's a qualification to preach. Because I was like you once, we say. Not in an uppity way. I was like you once, but I'm not anymore. So a question for you to ask you is, have you come to Jesus in such a way that now you're saying, my friends need to know him too? Saul preached to those who knew his former life, and that's not always an easy gig. I remember I used to be with my scabby surfing mates one night. I was about 18, and I had too much to drink. I was doing dumb things and saying dumb things, and one of my friends turned to me in roughly the same liquid position that I was in, and he said, you know what I like about you, Craig? You're not like other Christians. You're exactly like us. And I was like, oh, devastating. I'd painted a really, really bad picture of what Christians could be like. I don't think I was a Christian then, but I was saying that I was. But when I became a Christian, that was my chance to undo that. We can be slow to share Jesus and really share Jesus with our friends. But what makes us think that they are our friends if we're not able to share the number one thing about us now? Because the number one thing about us, the best thing about us, is what we say about Jesus. So how shallow is a friendship if we can't now speak to the most important thing about us now? To be real, my own story is that I did speak up more and more, and the faker my friendships were, the quicker that they went. The more quickly they disintegrated. But the authentic relationships, will they actually endure? And my current ongoing tactic has actually just to speak about Jesus as if he really exists. Because you know how sometimes we want to talk to someone, and then we have to be like, because I believe in God, and that's why I think like this. But we don't even have to say that. We just speak as if God exists, because he does exist. Even to those who don't believe him, we don't need to pretend like God didn't create everything, and we don't need to pretend like Jesus isn't the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Because it's true. We need a word for that kind of speaking, and the word I think we could use is fearless. And that's the word that describes Saul when he goes in verse 27. He says, Barnabas shared how Saul spoke fearlessly. So not obnoxious, not rude, not brash, not insensitive, just fearless. And we could ask ourselves, are we a fearless Christian this morning? Maybe that's something to ask this week. And fearless is something we may well need, because as we look at the fourth D, we see that it's difficulty. What did Saul get for all his troubles? He got difficulty. There in verse 23 we see, after many days had gone by, there was a conspiracy against the Jews to kill him. So the hunter has become the hunted. I said earlier that Jesus does mean a better life, though not necessarily an easier one. We will lose friends and alienate people. People rejected Jesus, and people will reject us too. I spoke about Sadhu Sundar Singh. When he became a Christian, the rest of the village started catching poisonous snakes and putting them through his window at night. That's what he got. At one point, he was stoned and left to die. Another point, he was thrown into a well that was full of old bones and animal carcasses, and he was only rescued after 3 days. Like, how do we know that our Christianity is real? It's that most likely there's going to be cultural difficulties. Just like Jesus had those difficulties, and Saul had those difficulties, and Sundar Singh had these difficulties, we're most likely going to experience some cultural difficulties too. That's probably a qualification that our Christianity is real. I mean, we got it pretty easy here, hey? Like, we probably won't get a raised fist, but we might get a few raised eyebrows, and they hurt enough. Exclusion. Your invites will dry out. And this hurts a ton. Perhaps it wouldn't be worth it if not for the fact that we've got one invite that blows all other invites out of the water. That Jesus himself invites us to his party upstairs. So how do we know our Christianity is real, measurable, observable? Well, difficulties will arise, but also our fifth D, that differences eventuate. We know our faith in Jesus is real and authentic if we make a difference, if people see a difference, if this church feels a difference in us. Like the church is strengthened in verse 22 and 31 as a result of Paul's ministry. I mean, the church especially sees it and will grow as a result of our ministries. And it's particularly strengthened when we are boldly living for Jesus too. For those of us who were born before the age of Netflix, you'll remember there was basically 3 movies that aired every 3 weeks. There was like Ben-Hur, Cleopatra, and Spartacus. And that was the only 3 movies out then. But there was this scene where the Romans catch all the people, and they're trying to find out, this rebel group, and they're trying to find out who the leader of the group is. And he's like, who's Spartacus? And Spartacus is going to stand up, and then someone else stands up and says, I'm Spartacus. And then another one, and then another one, another one. And they all stand up because, they're protecting their leader. And then they all get crucified. But that's not really the point. Or is that the point? That we're crucified with Christ? That we have been crucified with Christ? That we see ourselves as crucified with Christ? Because we no longer live, but Jesus Christ lives in us. And so why wouldn't we confess Jesus in all we do? I wonder if you can associate with this. Without Christ, it seems easier to fit in, but now with Jesus, you stand out. And it feels bad, but isn't that precisely the problem? Isn't that precisely the goal? Our message about Jesus stands out because it's supposed to stand out. We're supposed to stand out. Because what? message is better than the news that we have. That God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but will have eternal life. There is nothing better. No one needs to know anything more than they need to know that. Jesus not only brings life, but he affects life, and life with Jesus is supposed to change. That is, it's going to be better ultimately, not worse. So why would we be timid? We just got to keep telling ourselves this, because we are going to be timid. We are going to be scared. We're not going to be fearless, and that's why we need to keep telling ourselves we don't need to be. And not in a rude, not in a brash, not in an obnoxious way, but in a way where we fearlessly know that Jesus is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he's come to save people. We don't need to be timid about that. I recently, just a few weeks ago, spoke to someone who was going back to their family interstate, and most of them are no longer Christian, though they used to be. They've walked away. And even those who think they are Christians, their behavior says otherwise. But there is one or two who are Christians, but who are quiet and submissive. And my encouragement was, don't go over there as if you've got something to hide. Because Christians have nothing to hide and everything to show. If we're counted with Jesus, we're not the loser in any situation. Because Jesus is not the loser in any situation. If we're counted with Jesus, we're not the loser in the situation. We're the saved ones who are sent in to save others. That changes our goal when we go places. It's like we're going there on a chopper. You're going to a party, you're going there on a chopper. You're going to see your friends, you're going there on a chopper. You're going to be lowered down on a rope. So to wrap it all up, Saul met Jesus. He counted himself with Jesus. In doing so, he aligned himself with the church, the disciples. He attempted to undo his past wrongs. He faced difficulties, but he made a difference. And then the result was, verse 22, Saul grew more and more powerful and baffled the Jews living in Damascus by proving that Jesus is the Messiah. And verse 31, the church was strengthened. So that though we are not Sauls, like I'm not a Saul, you're not a Saul, but you are a you and I'm a me, are we willing to be sent on a chopper? Are we ready to descend that line to save for Jesus? Where does God send you in? It's like he sends us in the helicopter and then we're on the rope and we're like, are you going to go down on that thing? You're like, nah. Well, yeah, but that's why he sends us. He sends us to go down the rope, to speak. And let's consider who's listening and watching as we go. Does the God of all ages, who sees every motive of the heart, see me as being in line with being pro his Son? And not only does God himself see it, but does the world see it? And does the world hear that too?